I was 17 when this occurred. This dream happened during the middle of the fall. I stayed up late one night doing what most teenage boys do, playing video games, watching YouTube videos, and eating junk food. I admit that I probably should not have been eating right before bed, but I was too tired to care. I don't know exactly what time it was when I finally clocked out. When I woke up, I found myself inside of an orphanage, occupying the body of a child. I would say probably 7 or 8 years old. There were other beds lining the walls, with other children sleeping soundly. I heard my name being called out, and soon after a woman entered the room and made her way over to the foot of my bed.
"Oh, there you are. I've been looking for you. Come with me, child."
She took my hand and walked me over to her office, where I saw another woman waiting for us. She was a younger woman, wearing a red shirt and black yoga pants, very casual.
"This is the young boy I told you about. I think you two will get along splendidly."
Things seemed to fast forward in my dream, like a movie that shows you a title card that says, 3 months later. I wish I could fill you in on the details, but I genuinely don't remember. The next thing I knew, I was settled into my new home, and the woman in the red shirt was now my foster mother. She would occasionally invite a man over who I assumed was her boyfriend, and things went on like that for a while. At first, it was pretty much normal. However, things would eventually take an unexpected turn. One night, her boyfriend showed up at the house, uninvited. I heard him and my foster mother having a heated argument, and she refused to let him inside. They were having a conversation through the closed front door. "Honey, I don't want to bust down this door in front of the boy, but I will if I have to. You have 30 seconds.
"I told you before. You aren't welcome here. Just go away and leave us alone."
Let me in." The man then began kicking the front door. My foster mother turned to me and said,
"Hide."
It wasn't long before the door came crashing down.
"Leave us alone. He's just a child."
You knew from the very beginning that this day would come.
"No, please. Take me if you have to, but spare him."
Afraid I can't do that.
Now get out of my way.
The man's body then began twisting and contorting, his eyes rolling back into his head. A guttural moan emanated from his mouth as limbs sprouted from his body, and he became a writhing mass of flesh and bone. His face became a chattering impression within his deformed body. His arms were now just 2 swinging pieces of meat dangling beside the protruding talons, with razor-sharp claws attached to the ends. The appearance of the creature made me sick to my stomach. It looked like all the bodies in the morgue were emptied out into a giant blender. The monstrosity was tall enough to reach the ceiling. Suddenly, everything around me stopped. My foster mother stopped mid-stride as she was running towards me. The creature had not advanced from the doorway, but the moving parts that made up its design froze in place. I then heard an ear-splitting shriek, and everything fell apart like shattering glass. I wish I could tell you that I woke up, but the nightmare wasn't over just yet. I was now outside of the house, looking through the window. A bloody hand shot up out of the darkness and hit the pane, and then dragged itself down. I was absolutely terrified. I had never had a dream this vivid, this surreal. I just knew that I was going to die, and I resigned myself to my fate and closed my eyes and waited for that thing to break through the window and tear me apart. I was hoping to myself that it would be over quickly, When I opened my eyes again, I was still standing outside of the house. The sun was rising in the distance, providing just enough light for me to see a message written in blood on the surface of the window. After reading it, I finally woke up. I know you're probably wondering, what did the message say? Just 3 words that have haunted me to this day.
I'll be back.
This happened back when I was 13 or 14 years old. I had a history of having night terrors and nightmares, but they were few and far between. My dreams would typically be pleasant. I would dream of soaring through the clouds like Superman, running fast through an endless plain with animals. You get the idea. On the night in question, I did my normal routine, showered, watched TV, and then went to bed. In my bedroom, there's a window at the foot of my bed facing my backyard. After settling down, my eyes suddenly opened, and I sat up. Through the window directly in front of me, I saw a strange figure peering in at me. The creature had elongated fingers surmounted by claws. It stood on 2 legs and had these pointed ears. Before I could react, I was pulled through the window and thrown to the ground outside. For some reason, I landed in my front yard instead of the back, which would have made more sense. The thing then leapt down and started dragging me toward the backyard. It moved so quickly that I didn't have a chance to even think, but I soon snapped out of my trance and began kicking and screaming. Once we entered the backyard, I looked up and saw the old stone well. It had been there ever since we moved into this place. There was no telling how old it was. Upon seeing the structure, I knew instantly that this mutated elf that was dragging me around planned to throw me down it. "Let me go!" I shouted as I twisted my body, breaking its grip. As I ran away, I could hear the furious wails of anger echoing in the darkness. The next thing I knew, I was in my bed. I shot straight up, drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I had just sprinted a mile. The dream was so real to me, I can still remember every detail. I've heard stories of these so-called dream demons that haunt children and steal their souls. Perhaps this is what I saw all those years ago. Whatever the case may be, this experience has rooted a deep-seated fear in me that has haunted me for many years. After that night, whenever I would go to bed, I always worried that it may be waiting for me in my dreams. I moved into the house that I currently live in back in the summer of 2020. This nightmare happened about 6 months into living there. I sleep with a small fan on the nightstand next to my bed. I have a lot of trouble falling asleep without the noise it makes. I also tend to overheat at night, so having the fan aimed at me helps as well. The downside is that if it's aimed directly at my face, my eyes and throat will dry out, and I sometimes have to get up and put eye drops in or grab a drink of water. On the night in question, I woke up for this very reason, or at least I thought I did. It was hard for me to breathe, and my eyes were so parched that I couldn't even open them. I get annoyed at myself whenever this happens because I should know to position the fan correctly before laying down. Now, I'd have to get up, go to the bathroom, put in some eye drops, get a drink of water, and hope that I'm able to fall back asleep. As a side note, I don't have insomnia, but I can't just go in and out of sleep. Once I wake up, my body refuses to go back down, regardless of how tired I am. Sometimes I get lucky and I'm able to get some more sleep. Other times I just have to deal with operating on less than 8 hours of sleep. Anyways, I begrudgingly got out of bed and moisturized my eyeballs. and then made my way to the kitchen. As soon as you exit the master bedroom, directly in front of you is the hallway that leads to the other bedrooms in the house. As soon as I exited my bedroom, I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. It was dark, but the moonlight coming in through the windows provided just enough light for me to see something standing at the end of the hallway. It looked like someone wearing one of those full-body spandex suits, covered head to toe in black fabric. Now, I usually find that kind of attire amusing, but under the circumstances, it was very unsettling. I had no idea that I was actually dreaming in that moment, so I genuinely thought I was looking at an intruder inside of my house. What happened next caused all the hairs on my arms to stand up straight, and that's saying a lot because I have hairy-ass arms. Again, what I'm about to describe might sound amusing if you saw it anywhere else, besides inside of your home, in the dead of night. The figure raised its arms straight up, with its hands facing each other. It then lifted one of its legs and began skipping toward me, while keeping its upper body perfectly still, with its arms elevated. It was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen in my life. I remember backing away as it closed the distance. But before it could reach me, I woke up, covered in a cold sweat. The good news is that despite me having a nightmare, I actually managed to sleep through the night. By the time I woke up, it was already morning. I wish I could end this story with some kind of profound introspective, but honestly, I just had a weird nightmare about someone wearing a full-body suit, dancing toward me with their arms stretched up into the air.
There's always a reason to be afraid.
Before we begin, you must understand that everything you are about to read is absolutely true, and the events continue to this day. It was last summer. My girlfriend, now wife, and I finally made the big decision to move in together. Cobblestone Square is a situation of apartment complexes surrounding a central park. After living in another apartment for 2 years, I learned that a bigger apartment was opening up on the other side of the complex. We needed more space because my wife had 2 children from a previous marriage. After a rushed inspection, we were happy to move in right at the start of June. The months passed by, and the days grew shorter and colder. Autumn was drawing to a close, and with it, that's when the trouble began. In all the stories and movies, it starts out small. Things moving from place to place, lights being left on, etc., all chalked up to forgetfulness. This was true in our case, and we didn't think much of it. It only started to escalate with the children. Our apartment is set up with 2 bedrooms and bathrooms on opposite ends from each other. In our bedroom, we have our own private bathroom, and next to the kids' room is a small hallway leading to their own bathroom. We would give them baths in there and potty train, and almost as if flicking a switch, when the autumn months came, our youngest, a 2-year-old girl, would absolutely hate going in that bathroom. At the mere mention of bath time, she would go into hysterics, or on good days, she would sit in the tub, and in the process of bathing, she would look past myself or my wife and start screaming and crying. Oftentimes something would catch her eye in the mirror, and she would also start crying like mad. The most unsettling part would be that as soon as we took her out of the bathroom, she would stop and act as if nothing had happened. Our son, who was 4 at the time, would also run up to us and say that he would hear a voice saying, "Uppy," which was a common saying among the children when they wanted to be held. We asked if it was his sister, and he would profusely say that it wasn't, but he said it sounded like a kid. This happened a few times. With my wife being separated from her first husband and splitting custody, we would have the children come live with us every other week. On the weeks that the kids would go stay with their dad, the activity would seem to die down, but that didn't mean that it wouldn't happen at all. I asked my wife what she remembered from last year, and she recounted a time when we didn't have the children and she was cleaning the house. She noticed the kids' door was open. We usually keep it closed, but she thought maybe I had went into their room for something. She checked to see if I was inside, and seeing that I wasn't, she closed the door and didn't really think anything of it. It wasn't until a while later that she went to use the kids' bathroom and saw that the door was open again. She found me in our room and asked if I had opened it, and I said that I hadn't. With more incidents of lights being found on and doors opening, it all came to a head near the end of October when I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Above the sink, facing the living room, is a small window that allows someone in the kitchen to look out into the dining room and the living room, and additionally the back door, which is a sliding glass door. Important detail. After the kids had been put to bed and were asleep, my wife and I went about our normal duties and chores, trying to finish up before the next day started. As I was washing dishes, I looked up from the sink and saw in the glass of the sliding glass door the reflection of a large shadow in the hallway to the kids' bedroom. It quickly entered the bathroom, and I immediately walked over, turning on the light, and seeing nothing there. I went to my bedroom where my wife was vacuuming, and I asked her if she by chance went into the kids' bathroom for whatever reason. I wasn't surprised by her response when she said no, and I told her what I had seen. It was after this event, and subsequently Halloween, that all the activity seemed to stop. More months passed by again, and we jumped to 2020. August. As soon as the activity started again, I began to keep a journal of all the findings. That way there was a record. On August 10th, I went to the bathroom, the kids' bathroom, before going to bed, and heard a small child giggle. Both children were fast asleep. On August 11th, my wife was bathing our daughter, and for the first time in a year, our little girl started to shriek in fear until she was out of the bathroom. On August 13th, while getting ready for bed, our son knocked on our door. I'm always the one to answer, and he told me that he was afraid. He wouldn't elaborate on why, but when I laid him down in his bed, he begged for the closet to be closed. The closet has never been a problem, and a few nights after this we returned to it being opened and haven't experienced anything like it again. On August 15th, my wife and I had an argument, and I went out to the couch to sleep for the night. As I was tossing and turning, I heard a child's voice in the night say, "Uh-huh," as if answering a question. I didn't react, and forced myself to go back to sleep. Both myself and my wife have caught our son speaking to himself as well. My wife told me that once she heard him saying, "Ow, stop it, you're hurting me," and when she went to go check on him, he was in the hallway by the kids' bathroom, holding his arm. During the daytime, the kids were playing, and both me and my wife were doing our own thing. As I was sitting on the couch, our son runs behind the couch and stops, and then says, "And how would you do that?" out of the blue. I turn to him and ask him who he's talking to, and after a moment's hesitation, he says, "Nobody." I told him I heard him say something, and he then insisted that he didn't say anything. On one occasion, my wife was sleeping on the couch, and in the middle of the night heard a man's whisper say, "Don't get up," to which she promptly obeyed. It was the night after that I woke up from my sleep in bed to see a shadow shape standing over me with piercing red eyes. I felt as if it was going to hurt me. My wife and I have naturally begun our interest in the spiritual world. We began researching and looking for ways to go about this. We've purchased a Ouija board with no results, and from a medium, a supposedly haunted ring. If our apartment was going to be haunted, we wanted to know by who and with what intention. It seems as if our mail-order ghost has already made their home, as one morning our front door was unlocked and slightly ajar, with nothing stolen. Tonight, as I write this, my wife and I were watching TV on the couch and decided to call it an evening. But as we got to our bedroom, I noticed a low scratching sound coming from the record player. I opened it up and saw that the turntable was moving as the needle was off its holder, turning the record player on. I replaced the needle and tried knocking the player a few times to see if it could have been easily bumped or knocked off, but no. The only way to move that needle was to pick it up with your fingers and set it down. I was reminded of one other time that this happened, long before we bought any haunted items. I am thoroughly convinced that my apartment is haunted. People die in them way too often to think it's not a possibility, and if nobody died here, the cemetery across the road definitely doesn't bring me any comfort. I can say that two distinct entities can be somewhat accounted for, a small child ghost and something else. Or maybe something that wants to be viewed as a child, but let's think happy thoughts. We still live here to this day. Autumn is just beginning, and that's when things really seem to get interesting. Last night was awfully weird. I was in my childhood home, but at my current age. As I opened the door to my grandmother's room, it suddenly swung back and forth while my hands were still holding it from the side, not the doorknob, and it pulled me forcefully into the room and onto the floor. I felt a cold sweat coming on, but suddenly realized that I had to toughen up and shake it off. I screamed something like, "This is my house! You have no right to scare me! How dare you!" over and over again. I came close to the door and would hear a faint, high-pitched, distorted, tee-hee kind of laugh. Then I woke up. I thought it was already around 6 a.m. because that's usually the time when my alarm goes off. As I grabbed my phone, I was surprised to see that the time was actually 3:07 a.m. I already felt partially awake, as anyone who wakes up at 6 a.m. would. Now I have to force myself back to sleep or I'll feel awful in the morning. I play some ambient sleep sounds from Alexa while I observe the room, anxiously expecting something out of the ordinary, but nothing happened. I fell back asleep, and in my next dream, I was at a hospital with a group of people that I don't know, but somewhere we were grouped together. There's about 5 or 6 of us in a room, with a dead person in the bed, covered with a sheet. As I left the room, I saw 2 more of the people in our group suddenly appear in a different room, somewhat helping each other put another dead body into a hospital bed while the family weeps. I went back to see the rest of the group in the original room, trying to position the dead body to sit up. The dead guy is of mixed Chinese descent, a bit overweight, and bald. Then some information came into my head that he used to own a restaurant or a bar. As they moved his torso upwards, they failed, and the dead body dropped onto the floor. This is when things start to get really weird, because the dead guy woke up like he was startled from his sleep. He stood up and started chasing us, accusing us of killing him. His bowels were a mess, and I could see a stab wound on his belly and on his lower back. I ran away in a long corridor and found myself in the nurse's changing room. It had open cubicles like the ones from football players' dressing rooms, with scrubs and casual clothes alike hanging on the wall. I was partially covered in the dead guy's bodily fluids, so I washed up. Then a nurse found me. I looked terrified of what happened, so I explained the situation to her and led her to that room. The nurse came in and started to comfort the dead guy. He began to calm down and sat beside the nurse, then closed his eyes. The nurse looked at me, and without talking, some information came into my mind. I learned that he was a hopeless case, so they just let him lie down until he dies, as he was already in the process of dying when we startled him. After that moment, I woke up, and this time it was truly 6 a.m., 6:30-ish already. I didn't feel any dread as you would in a nightmare. I did a bit of research on dream meanings, but I felt that it didn't fit with me. Then I found out the significance of 3:07 a.m. from the movie The Conjuring, so I thought the exact time was just a coincidence, since it's just a movie. I could not remember the last time I woke up in the middle of the night. It would be very, very rare that it's not worth remembering. But waking up at 3 a.m. with 2 weird dreams will definitely stay with me forever. I was 13 years old, 2003. My friend and I were bored and decided to have some weird fun. Now, I've always had interest in supernatural and occult-like things. I've always been very empathic and in tune to things in a way that's hard to explain. Anyways, I didn't have a real Ouija, so we used paper and drew one, and then used a quarter for the planchette. We asked if anyone was there and if they wanted to talk. Of course, there was nothing for a few minutes. Suddenly, the feathers of my dream catcher in my room started to sway. No open window or AC on. We asked again if anyone was there, and then it felt like there was a pull. We allowed ourselves to let go and just see what happened. It went to the yes. We asked what its name was, and we felt pulled towards D and C. Just those letters, D, C. Odd. A minute or so later, my grandma called for us that she was ready to go, as we were about to go to the mall. We stood up and walked out of my room. My friend looked at my face and gasped, and told me to look in the mirror. I had about a 2-inch scratch on my face that was not there before. We were a little freaked out, but mostly confused. We went shopping and my grandma asked what had happened, and I told her I really didn't know. The next morning, the scratch was gone. After that night, however, things got pretty bad. My room for some reason started to feel colder than the rest of the house. Even my grandma commented a few weeks later that my room was, quote-unquote, cold as death. My dog stopped coming into my room as well. He would stand at the doorway and I would call for him and he would just look at me and leave. He might come in rarely for a minute or so, but he would never stay. I started to get feelings like I wasn't alone. The air felt thicker, the dark seemed darker. When I was home alone, I would hear things, footsteps and creaking. One night, it all came to a head. My grandparents went out to dinner and I stayed home. I was downstairs playing on the desktop and instant messaging my friend. The bathroom door next to me had been shut tight, but made a clicking sound. The knob had turned, and the door had opened slowly. I got up and slammed it shut. I went back to playing my game and instant messaging when I heard a loud crash. I got up and saw my grandparents' crucifix that had been hanging on the wall, on the floor. I put it back and turned on as many lights as I could, and the TV, and just took my mind off it all. Around this time, my grandma, who is very Catholic, started getting into more New Age things like crystals and psychics. She went to one and the psychic told my grandma that she had a granddaughter who saw orbs, but that these orbs I had been seeing were angels protecting me. It is true that I had been seeing a lot of flashing lights that I called orbs in those months. Fast forward a year or so, and some things happened to me that I won't go into here. Depression and hospitalizations and boarding schools. When I got home from boarding school, my grandma told me that she had spent a night in my room. She had laid down to go to sleep, and suddenly heard a cranking noise. She said she remembers thinking to herself, "Please don't start playing music." And then my music box started playing. She said she bought a lot of different incense and played a special prayer on repeat for days and basically prayer bombed the whole house. When I returned home, my room felt clean, like whatever had been there was gone. Safe. I stopped seeing the orbs as much. I never played with a Ouija board again, but I do love the designs. I have a Ouija board mug and a Ouija board mat on my dresser. I like the symbol and am not afraid of them, but I will never use one again. I have been tempted through the years to try again, hoping that maybe being better prepared I can have a safer outcome, but I just don't know if I want to take that chance of opening a door to any stranger knocking. This happened about 13 years ago. I'm currently 28 and my childhood dog died in early high school for me. This wasn't too long after. Upon looking up what this is, it was most likely a false awakening, but still gives me chills to this day. I shared a room with my older brother, who was a pretty heavy sleeper once he got there. He'd usually be up playing video games all night, and I got used to being able to fall asleep through the sounds of him yelling at COD players for using noob tubes and all that good stuff. One night I woke up feeling the foot of my bed sink in like someone was down there. When I looked, I noticed a small child sitting with his back toward me. The child seemed to be wearing a black shirt with white horizontal stripes. I immediately thought to myself, alright, fuck that, and went back to sleep. I woke up what felt like a few hours later, and he was now standing at the foot of my bed, facing me, holding my dead dog's head in his hands. The child was surrounded by an extremely dark aura, so much so that I didn't gather any details on skin complexion or anything. I immediately lost my shit and freaked out, falling out of my bed. This part creeped me out because the fall was very detailed. I knocked over an acoustic guitar that I had on a stand near my bed when I fell out, and my brother shuffled in his sleep due to the noise. When I tried to wake him up, he mumbled, half asleep, that we needed to get more Pepsi, not an encounter with him that would surprise me at all, and went back to sleep. I then scrambled back into my bed, all while this kid was just watching me, holding my dog's head throughout. I fell back asleep, and then had my real awakening that morning. The guitar was in its stand, and everything was normal. I ended up not telling anybody about this dream. The really fucked up part, and why this particularly bad dream still gives me chills, has to do with the fact that my dog was buried in my backyard, in a little side yard that always had some really weird energy to it. Months later, my friends and I were hanging out, and we usually smoke weed in my backyard close to this side yard area. We had made our way inside and were munching and watching movies when my good friend Joe said that he needed to run to the backyard and get his phone. He went out to get it with his usual demeanor, but I heard his footsteps running full sprint back to the back door into the house. His skin was pale, and he was visibly shaken up. I asked him what was wrong. His response? Dude, you're going to think I'm crazy. But I just saw a little kid standing where your dog is buried. The scariest thing that ever happened to me came from the person closest to me. My ex-husband and I were both only 19 when we married. When we first met, everything was glorious. I moved in with him and his family because me and mine were having a lot of trouble at the time, and for the first year, all was golden. Then one day, his stepdad went missing. The police found his body almost a week later, murdered. The tragedy tore through the three of them, Nikki, his mother, and sister, with an intensity similar to a massive hurricane. If Nikki's biological father had been present, that might have been one thing, but that piece of human excrement was not just absent, but only made the occasional appearance to steal one of the kids' social security checks from the mail on arrival, and that was usually when he knew no one would be home. When Fiona married Dave, he had become their father, the only father they ever really had. He was their true family. After the homicide, Nikki's whole personality shifted toward darkness. He would rant and rave like a man possessed, and become violent if I didn't do everything he told me to do, no matter what it was. To this day, I have scars from a physical altercation with his sister on being commanded to attack her and having no choice but to do so, for example. The scars make me who I am now, a survivor, but I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone. Being terrified for your life every single day and never knowing if any given moment could lead to your last is exhausting and traumatizing to say the least. One day we got into it so badly that I told him I wanted to divorce. He kicked me out of my own car at my parents' house and tore out of the driveway, spraying gravel everywhere and leaving puffs of dust floating up toward the sky. I was utterly distraught by the entire situation at that point, completely at my wit's end. Yet for some reason I still loved him, still wanted to make things work out, and for us to be together. So when he called and begged for the chance just to talk things over, of course I agreed, and went outside to anxiously await his return to pick me up. I expected him to have calmed down by the time he arrived. At least, that was what his tone had suggested over the phone. But when I got in the car, the whole vibe felt off, chaotic. The tension was almost physically too much to handle. We rode in silence for about 5 minutes before he shot me a quick glare and then returned his attention to the road. His dark eyes drilled right through me, their anger giving off a certain glint like that of coal. "You know you're my wife, right?" he asked in a syrupy, sickly sweet voice. "That means you belong to me." I didn't really know how to respond, so I said nothing. My mind turned 1,000 miles an hour, deciphering what he was telling me, though. His level of possessiveness over me had steadily increased in the past 6 months or so after Dave's death, as if he were terrified of me disappearing along with the glue that had held together his tiny little broken family. My subconscious screamed at me that the whole thing had been a ruse, a trick to lure me back into the car. I looked down at my hands in my lap, wringing them together until my knuckles turned red. "I thought you wanted to fix things," I said. He smirked, and my gut went cold. My worst fears confirmed in that twisted, psychotic expression of his. "What do you think this is?" he replied. "It feels like a trick," I told him. He pursed his lips together, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. His shoulders tensed, and his expression grew more malvoyant than ever. "That's because it was a trick," he murmured. "If I can't have you, no one can." Until the moment he said those words aloud, I always thought of that expression as one of those you only ever hear or read in fiction. It never occurred to me that there was a reason that it existed. Someone, or many others most likely, who had heard the phrase and felt the sheer horror that accompanied its implication. In the course of our relationship, I endured punches, kicks, 2 totaled cars, and multiple death threats. A couple of weeks after this incident, I finally managed to get away from him for good. I stayed the night at a friend's house after getting what little things I needed. She lived not far from his grandparents, but I didn't really think anything of it because the neighborhood is one of those upscale, quiet, safe kind of suburbs. We partied most of the night. She went upstairs to sleep around 1 and left me on the couch in the living room watching TV, willing myself to pass out. About an hour later, around 2 a.m., I felt like someone was watching me. I looked over at the sliding doors to my left that led out into the backyard, and there he was. He was standing outside, in the dark, in the rain, watching me and crying with his fists clenched. I felt my eyes grow wide, and I sank slowly down into the leather cushions as if they could make me disappear from sight. I don't know how much longer he was there. When I looked again, he was gone. The next day, my mom came to get me, because he wrecked my car, so I no longer had a ride. He was standing at the corner staring at her as she drove past. We had to get a police escort to take us straight to the station to get a restraining order. I spent the next year getting the divorce straightened out and getting the rest of my belongings that he was trying to hold hostage, like my birth certificate, diploma, and social security card. I spent the next 6 years, even after entering into a wonderful and truly loving relationship, in fear that he would come for me. Even now, 8 years later, sometimes he will still try to contact me through other people or fake accounts on social media. Sometimes the most unsuspecting person is the one you have to worry about. Sometimes all it takes is one tragedy to twist a person completely inside and turn them into a monster on the outside. I come from the county where Ireland's most haunted house, Loftus Hall, is located. If you want to know the history of Loftus Hall and the original story to it, I'm sure you can find it on Google. People that have visited all have their own stories of experiences at the house, and I'm going to share with you some of my experiences that I've had over the years. I lived about a 30 minutes drive away from it, so it was a destination that we visited a lot. I remember the first time I visited the grounds of the house. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old and was visiting it with my uncle. As we drove up the long lane leading the way to the house, I remember looking at all of the windows and getting a shiver as we approached. We parked and got out of the car. I stood and stared at the house. We walked around the grounds and around to the side of it where, at the time, there were apple trees. We picked some of them, as they were red and juicy, and put them in a bag to bring them home with us. When we got home and got the apples out of the bag, every single one had a rotten part on one side. I mean, a big, green, soft, gooey lump on all of them. Another time, when I was around 14, I had went to Loftus Hall with my friend and his mom. There's a nearby lighthouse that's open for people to visit, and we went there first. When we got to the house, there were a few people around, and a young American family there. A mom, dad, and 2 girls, aged around 5 and 9-ish. The 2 girls were running around and playing on the grounds when they ran to their parents laughing, and the 9-year-old said, "Mommy, Mommy, Anne wants to show us something. Can we go to her room?" Now, this may seem like normal child behavior, but Anne is the name of the girl in the original haunting story of Loftus Hall. I must also mention that the actual house was not open for guests to go in and out of as they pleased. Not at that time. When I was 16, that was my first time going into the house. We booked a tour on Halloween night. There were some ghost hunters who do an overnight stay every year, and a certain amount of guests can stay there with them for the night. We arrived and went in. We set up our sleeping bags while the ghost hunter crew set up their equipment. We took the tour of the house at night with a tour guide and in groups of 5. We went to each room with the guide giving the story behind it. We got to a room called the Tapestry Room. This is the most famous, and apparently most haunted room in the building. It's said that Anne was locked in this room, and she died in the room as she stared out the window waiting for her mysterious stranger to return. You can actually find the details of this story online. She was locked in there, and sat with her knees to her chin, and when she died, her body could not be straightened. Anyway, we entered this room and it was freezing. One of the guests in our group, now I don't know if they were paid actors or not, but one of the guests in our group collapsed and went into a fit, arms and legs flailing everywhere. An ambulance was called, and he was sent to the hospital. Apparently, it happens often that people collapse and have seizures once they enter that room. The house is situated on a cliff, and the sea is in the background. About 4 years ago, we went for a drive down there on a foggy evening, and we were looking out to the sea. As we did, we saw the outline of a ship. It looked like something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, but it floated through the fog and vanished. There have been hundreds of encounters regarding this house that are recorded. Everyone has their own experiences from visiting, everything from feeling queasy in certain parts of the house, to seeing ghosts in the windows, to meeting people while on tours that nobody else who was on the same tour remembers. There's also a hole in the ceiling that goes through the roof, and this is where the devil flew through to escape from the house. Over the centuries, this hole has been repaired multiple times, but each time it is repaired, it will only last for a few days and then reopens again in the same place. I was at Fort Sill for basic training. Every night we took turns doing the fire guard. It's basically where 2 soldiers rotate every hour to watch the door and make sure that everyone stays in bed. There were 4 barracks bays. Ours, the female bay, was upstairs and across the hall from a male bay, but we used separate stairwells. So us females and drill sergeants were the only ones using this center stairwell. The drill sergeants would come up to check on us periodically. The doors were heavy and loud. We could clearly hear when they went into the bay across the hall. Every now and then, we would hear footsteps come all the way up the stairs and stop. Neither of the doors would be open, and we'd never hear them go back down. We even heard objects rolling down the stairs. You could hear them hitting every individual step as they went down. It was so scary. After lights out, everyone had to stay in bed. We had to let the fire guard know if we were going to be getting up to go to the bathroom, and no showering was allowed after that time. There were times that we would hear people talking in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and sometimes we would hear the showers going. We would go to look because we would all get in trouble if someone was up making noise, but no one was ever in there. I should also mention that the lights are motion sensed. So we would walk in and the lights would turn on, meaning that a physical person hadn't been walking around in there for at least a few minutes. Our beds were all in rows and lined up. One night we all got woken up by a scream right next to our row of beds. All of us sat up at the same time, freaked out, and looked at each other. We couldn't figure out where it came from. This was in 2019 at Fort Pickett during our annual summer training. We were in the field, which is basically like camping in tents. There was a large open field where the medical tent was, and then our personal tents were back in the tree line. There were a few nights where people were woken up by something shaking their tents, whispering their names, or vivid nightmares. Some even saw figures standing outside their tents. Some people had dreams that they were woken up only to be in another dream. I was with another sergeant in a 2-person tent far off to the edge of the group. One night, I heard footsteps all around our tent, almost circling it. It was as if a whole platoon was walking past us very slowly. But our medical area was so far away from all of the other training areas, and as far as I knew, no one was out training at 2 a.m. Period. This last one happened at Fort Indian Town Gap. My ex used to tell me while he was sleeping that he saw a man or figure standing next to the bed or in the corners of the room. He often saw a man with a mustache, specifically. I don't know who that could have been, but anyway, fast forward to another annual training and we had some free time one day, so most of us decided to go back and take a nap in the barracks. The girl in the bunk next to me was asleep for about an hour when she woke up and asked me if she had been screaming. I said, "No, you didn't say anything the whole time, you were just asleep." She said that she had just had sleep paralysis and thought that she was awake. In her awake dream, she was in the same barracks with all of us, but we were all staring at her. But the thing that got me, she said that there was a man with a mustache standing next to my bunk. He was bent over and was the only person looking at me instead of her. She's a complete skeptic, and I had never told her about what my ex saw. I bought a replica of Ivan the Terrible and his son, an old piece of macabre art from Russia back in the day, and hung it up on my wall in a huge portrait behind me yesterday. It's a rumor or popular belief that the painting is cursed, and I've always been a fan of strange items and collectibles, so that's why I bought it. As I went to sleep last night, I was stricken with nightmares. Terrible nightmares. I dreamt I was in a camper with a friend and we sat down to watch a movie called Pendulum. It was a knockoff of Hellraiser. We began watching it and the computer screen just shut off and we couldn't get it to turn back on, so we had a collective fuck it moment and I exited the camper to go back inside to the house whilst my dream friend stayed in the camper. As I came back out, still during the dream night, with a drink, I noticed blood splattered on the windows and rushed inside. My friend had been beaten to death, and Pendulum was pulling himself through the computer screen. After this, I woke up, and by that, I mean I came to a real-world setting where I was asleep on my couch last night. I attempted to get up and get some water, as I was thirsting after such a nightmare. I made it to the kitchen, cracked it open, and let it hit my lips, and then suddenly, I was on the couch, again. In my mind at that moment, I considered that I had actually woken up. I sat up and walked into the kitchen again, cracked open that same water, when suddenly the refrigerator opened beside me, and I knew I was dreaming then. I woke up on the couch again, real as day, except it wasn't, as I went to drink that water again, and woke up on the couch again. After this is where it really started to get frightening. I considered that I was stuck in a loop, except this time I went to get up for water and walked past that area with the painting, and noticed that it was gone. This let me know I was still dreaming, and that I had another false awakening. I woke up for the water once more and started across the living room when I looked to an open doorway that I hang colorful beads from, and in the dark room veiled by the hanging threads was Pendulum. That woke me again. This time I ran to the window and looked out to see cops rushing down my small street to the neighbor's house. My neighbor shot and killed her husband in the front yard 2 weeks ago, and that woke me up again. After waking up a few more times for water, I tried to go outside after another loop, except when I opened the front door, it was pitch black. Then car lights turned on and sped toward me. As I was about to get smacked with someone's F-150, I woke up again. At this point, I stopped trying to go anywhere and just kept trying over and over and over to slap myself truly awake. After looping for another 30 times or so, I eventually actually woke up and was relieved. I got that fucking water, and downed it in one go. When I was younger, my mama would leave me home alone with my older brothers. As soon as she would leave, they would pull out a hidden Ouija board and play around on it. Of course, I wasn't allowed to be part of the game. I was probably around 6 or 7, and they were in their late teens. I can remember so vividly these memories. Mama left, and the boys went into a bedroom off the kitchen where the board was hidden. They closed the door behind them, and I was left watching cartoons by myself in the living room. The bedroom door had a gap under it, about 1.5 inches tall, and I would sometimes quietly go lay on the floor and watch them play with it through the gap. I can remember them making contact with a spirit one night, and they asked its name, to which it replied, Tobias. Each time they played after that, it always seemed to be Tobias reaching out. For about a week they conversed with this spirit, and nothing out of the ordinary seemed to come from it. However, one night, as I was watching them, the board started talking about me. My brothers would always write down the things being communicated and read them aloud, which made it easy for me to eavesdrop on them. As I lay there on the kitchen floor looking under the door, the game became active and my brothers started writing. I saw both of them make eye contact and look at each other, confused. My oldest brother said, "It said we are being watched?" As they looked around the room, I snuck back to my cartoons. They opened the door and checked on me, then went back into the room. I crept back over to watch some more. This time, the board used my name. I recall my brother saying, "It says Bianca needs to go away." I could feel the blood leave my face. I knew my brothers hadn't seen me watching. I got up and pretended to be sleeping on the couch, and eventually just actually did fall asleep there. I was awoken in the middle of the night by a strange sound, kind of like the sound a cat makes in its throat when it's mad. I sat up and cleaned the sleep from my eyes. After sitting there in the dark for a moment, it seemed to go quiet in the house. I was getting ready to get up and go to the bathroom, but I felt unable to stand, almost like something was pushing down on my shoulders. Then suddenly, it was like I was in a wind tunnel. I remember Mama's sheer curtains were whirling around, and it felt like they filled the room. I felt so dizzy, and then it just stopped. I don't remember going to sleep at all, but I woke up on the same couch, and it was daylight outside. I have never spoken about this to anyone, but the story doesn't end there. My brothers continued to mess around with the board, which I was no longer wanting to be around. It got to the point that weird things were happening to them, too. They would talk about it amongst themselves, and I would play oblivious. One night, my brothers walked out of the bedroom with a rolled-up sheet and scissors. They told me that they would be right back and walked out the door. The next morning, I learned that the board had said some things that really frightened them. They took it down the road to the old iron bridge near our house to cut it up and throw it over into the water. We were all sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast when we heard a loud crash outside. We ran out to see a car had wrecked on the bridge. My brothers were sure it was because of the Ouija spirit that they thought they had disposed of the night before. The person who wrecked happened to be a person that my brother went to school with. He told my brother that he wrecked because as he was driving over the bridge, a demon-like figure appeared next to him in the car. He later found a piece of the board in his car, and nobody knows how it got there. My unit in the U.S. Army was deployed to Iraq in April of 2006. We were in Ramadi. It was 123 kilometers or 77 miles outside of Baghdad. I was in a Humvee headed to Baghdad for emergency leave due to a death in my family. It was close to midnight, and the Humvee I was in was with 3 others and a turret gunner. The 2 other Humvees had the same 5 total people, 1 in front, 1 in back. I was without a weapon due to my leave. The Humvee in front stopped hard. We all figured it was a possible IED or VBIED. The team leader in our HV radioed to the lead HV. The convo went along these lines. "What's up? Why did you stop?" "Something flew in front of the HV." "What? Flew in front of the HV?" "Yes. We didn't see anything." And then the third HV piped in, "Does anyone hear that helo?" HV1 replied, "Yes." HV2, our HV, "Yes, but I don't see it." Just then, in the desert off the highway, was a black figure. It looked like a huge bird. It was like smoke was emitting from it, like a blackish, greenish smoke with a bit of blue tinge. We all focused our eyes to the 2 troops with better night vision. They could see something but couldn't make out what it was, as the smoke was distorting the view. Within a second or two, a rock was thrown at one of the HVs. A big rock, like the size of someone's head. We all froze. Because of rules of engagement, we weren't allowed to just light it up. We used a spotlight, and in that light, something just flew straight up, and it was loud. And then we heard a loud screeching noise as well. Within a minute or two, it was over. We all sat there in a state of shock, curiosity, and panic. WTF was that? When we got to Baghdad, the translator that they were picking up to bring to the Marines that were with us said that it sounded like an Ifrit. The team leader said, "What?" He explained to us that it was a winged jinn. We were all a bit speechless. We chose not to disclose to our command the winged thing, as battle fatigue, now known as PTSD, was a career killer at this juncture. It's been 13 years since this happened, and I met my now husband in 2015, and he had also been deployed to Ramadi with my sister unit at the time, and he had went through this particular stretch of highway on his mid-deployment leave. He recounted a similar story to me. It was enough to stop me in my tracks. It was pretty close to mine, except that they didn't stop, they just boogied on through. Considering the time we were there was very deadly, including an aid station manned by soldiers that was ambushed and blown to bits. I was a medic, so death was my norm. I still can't wrap my mind around it. And now, apparently, the last 2 places I lived in, something has followed us. I'm an atheist, not very superstitious, but my family are big believers and have always claimed that our house was haunted. So about 2 hours ago, I fell asleep in the guest bedroom. Everyone avoids that room, but I like the ambience, so I've been spending a lot of time in there lately. I should probably note that there's a mirror by the bed. So first, I thought my mom walked in, and I remember saying, "Get out!" I know I heard the door open. I just asked her if she went in, and she didn't even know that I was taking a nap. Then, as I was sleeping, I heard whispering and scratching sounds. I started remembering things that never happened, and I could envision a lady with black hair sitting on the couch in the room. I knew I needed to get the hell out of there, so I tried waking up. The dream was so vivid that I thought I did wake up. I looked around the room, and written in red everywhere was murder, death, etc. There were also red tally marks all over the walls. There was a doll on the floor, a life-sized cloth one. And that's when I knew I was still dreaming. Suddenly I look over to the couch, and there she is. It was the lady with black hair. I tried waking up, but at this point I was experiencing sleep paralysis and I couldn't open my eyes. Finally, I woke up for real and ran out of that room. I don't ever want to go back. Anyone have any ideas on what happened? Am I overreacting? Edit. Okay, I'm getting freaked out now. I just woke up, it's 5 in the morning, to another dream. This time I was in a normal world and felt like I was being watched. I kept telling everyone, but they wouldn't believe me until I fell asleep in the dream. Something or someone pulled the blankets up and laid down next to me. I'm not joking. Someone please help. I don't know what's going on. I had a gut feeling that it was that thing again. I woke up and had to call my mom to come in. This is getting weird. For someone who doesn't believe in God, I want to call an exorcist. In the early 2000s, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents had just gotten through divorce and my mom started dating this guy. He would come over to our house regularly. Things didn't seem that bad at first, but he actually drank daily. This was something I didn't understand yet at my age, but yeah. So this guy wasn't all that bad with my sister, who was 2 or 3 at the time, but he took some sadistic interest in hurting me. He would arrive at our house almost every day, and the first thing he would do was take off his belt and start beating me with it. This got to the point where I would hide if I knew he was coming. As for why my mother didn't leave him then, he threatened to kill us if she did. Now, this one incident is burned into my memory. On one random day, he had found a nice little cardboard box. He picked me up and shoved me into said box and sat on top of it. My mother was doing the dishes, and I assumed she couldn't hear me screaming for her as I peered out of the box's handle hole at her back, before he covered the holes with his hands. I screamed for a good few minutes as this asshole just laughed about torturing me. The only reason he got off the box was that I had a small screwdriver in my pocket that I used to stab him right in his ass cheek. This got him to fly up off the box, and pissed him off because he wasn't having fun anymore. He picked me up again and carried me off to my room, where he proceeded to beat me with his belt. Then he left me in my room after taking my lamp and locked my door. I was afraid of the dark, so I cried and screamed some more. I did so until he finally left, and my mother came and opened my door again. The random beatings would go on until he eventually got in trouble for something and ended up going to jail. Sometimes I think maybe my mother called the police on him. He called my mom from jail and told her that if she found anyone else, that he would kill her, me, and my younger sister. We ended up moving 3 cities over, and as far as I know, my mom never heard from him again. This guy is almost single-handedly responsible for several of my long-term phobias, and as an adult now, I'd kick his ass if I saw him again. So a couple of years ago, I want to say like 2 or 3, me and my friend were bored. This was around the time that the Ouija board trend was going around on YouTube, and that kind of stuff has always, and still does, fascinate me. So we both decided to make a Ouija board out of a rectangle of cardboard that we cut off of a box. I believe we also made a ghetto-looking planchette out of cardboard too, with a hole cut out of the middle and everything. So anyways, we brought the thing into the basement of my house. Already a huge mistake, as I learned after. And we started messing around and using it. I don't even remember what we asked it or anything that really happened in detail, but I do remember being in such shock because I felt a strong connection, almost like a magnetic pull, pulling it down and moving it from underneath. Another thing that we both admitted to feeling after we played with it for a couple of minutes was a cold chill, only on our arms, that we were playing with. It wasn't really a breeze, but it just felt, well, bone-chilling. The point of this story comes into play now. That night I was in my bedroom, and I got up to go to the washroom, which is straight across the hall from my room, to brush my teeth and get ready for bed. I left my phone on my bed before leaving. So after I was done getting ready and all, I opened the bathroom door and immediately noticed that my room's lights were turned off. This threw up a red flag in my mind right away, and while I was scared, I just thought it was nothing and flipped the lights in my room back on. I went to grab my phone to distract me from the adrenaline and try to calm me down before bed, and I didn't see it on my bed. Or anywhere, for that matter. I got creeped out, and immediately flipped the lights off and jumped into bed and hid under the covers. I tried to fall asleep, even though the thought that the Ouija board we had used earlier that day was in the closet about 5 feet away from me would not leave me alone. I swear I heard a faint knock from inside my closet multiple times that night, but maybe it was just my mind messing with me. The next morning I wasn't as scared or freaked out as I was the night before, and I got up to take a shower. Once I got out of the shower and stepped out of the bathroom, my phone was right there, on the floor, right in front of me. To this day, it still troubles me, and I have no idea what happened that night. I haven't touched the cardboard Ouija again, but I did purchase a legit Ouija board like 3 months later, and have not really had any outstanding experiences with it, like I had with the cardboard one. My partner and I had just become parents, and were looking for our first home. We found an older house built around 1910-1920, which seemed perfect. It was next to a good school and close enough to family that could help out with our daughter. Everything seemed great for the next couple of years, but there was always a heavy type of atmosphere that was hard to explain. And we had this feeling like we were being watched all the time. My wife was the first to notice it, and I would always brush it off as if there was nothing to be scared of. I always carried that mindset, as I was highly skeptical of any type of paranormal activity, and I always trusted the whole "if you can't see it, then it doesn't exist" paradigm. How wrong I was, it turned out. The initial signs were that things would go missing and then suddenly turn up in the most peculiar of places, like photos, and my watch, which ended up in the bathtub. But most of the time, things seemed to find their way into the wardrobe that was in the master bedroom. Once my daughter woke us up in the night to tell me that someone had just walked out of her window. As she grew up, she would complain that the man was in her room and she couldn't sleep. I was still not believing that this could be a ghost, so I would comfort her and stay with her until she went back to sleep, and I watched a black-like shadow thing, which I can only describe as darker than the shadows around it, move from the corner of the room and out of the window. I went back downstairs and sat on the sofa, where the deepest growl I ever heard happened, which completely took me by surprise, as it sounded as if it was right behind my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin and thought I needed a drink. I went to the kitchen and I could hear laughter in the living room. I couldn't think of any logical reason for it, so I went back upstairs and sat in my daughter's room again for the rest of the night, but nothing more happened. Eventually, things escalated to the point where every night around 2 a.m., you would hear walking up and down the stairs so loud that we nicknamed whatever it was Mr. Boots. When my daughter was around 10, we would get massive bangs in the middle of the night. When it first happened, I honestly thought we were being burgled. I would run down the stairs only to find nothing, not a thing out of place. I had the plumbing checked and electrical, but all was good. Then, one night, I fell asleep downstairs, and an inflatable hammer flew at the TV, instantly waking me with the noise because it had a squeaker in it. I again was trying to work out how that had happened, and whilst I was thinking about it and looking at the hammer on the floor, it started spinning really slowly. I jumped up and walked to the kitchen, and again I heard the laughter. I then heard the boots on the stairs, and my wife suddenly comes down the stairs, woken by a really bad nightmare. While we were both talking in the kitchen, we heard the laughter again. Not long after this, we couldn't take it anymore and left. But I have hundreds of weird encounters, and I can honestly say that this house turned me into a believer. I always wondered what it was that was in that house. Ghost, demon. We still talk about that place now and then, and probably always will. The dream I just had was one of the most prophetic that I have ever had. I have gotten into the habit of listening to historical documentaries while I sleep, and one of them just made its way into my dream. Let me explain. I was sitting on a bed in a broken-down old house when I started hearing an animal screaming in pain outside. I run to the window, and I see an older man, and who I can only assume is his wife, outside this house, with a strongly malnourished panther that is on the ground in front of them. The older man has a whip, and is raising it up before I yell to stop, and the panther jumps up, climbs up the side of the wall to my window, and the large jungle cat climbs inside. I start to close the window, and the man starts to scream to give me his animal back to him. I only flip him the bird, and then turn to help the animal. I leave to go get some meat and a bed and whatever else I think the animal might need when I get back. It's nighttime. I walk back in, and I see the panther laying with his head on my pillow, asleep. I turn around to put the stuff down and close the door, and when I turn back, he's sitting up, staring at me. I apologize to him for waking him up, and I show him the meat. I tell him that I don't want him chewing on me next time he gets hungry, and he says, I couldn't. At this point, I'm completely caught off guard, and I just stare at him. He continued, You saved me. I would never eat you. My name is Ramses. I smile at him and introduce myself while placing the meat in front of him. As he finishes up, he looks up at me and says, Thank you. I wish I could be here on happier terms, but I have a message about this world and all of its humans. This world will have to face judgment in an endless desert. So much was given, and so much was ruined. Now there will be nothing. I'm sorry. I let him know that I understood, and I thank him for his message. Suddenly, the house around me begins to shake and crumble. Just before a large piece of wall falls on me, I wake up. This is a series of events that occurred when I lived on a plot of farmland a couple of years ago. I was pregnant with my daughter, and my boyfriend worked late at night, so I was home alone a lot. Things were okay for a while, but as time went on, it started feeling strange in the house. I always felt like I was being watched while in my bathroom and the hallway right by it. I started feeling uncomfortable around windows at night. I figured I was just scared of being there alone. One of the first strange events happened while my boyfriend and I were in bed. While watching TV, I saw the door handle to our room slowly turn as if someone were about to open the door, but then it turned back. It caught me off guard, and I was trying to get my boyfriend's attention, but it stopped when he finally looked. Things began falling off the surfaces outside where my boyfriend would go to smoke cigarettes. He told me he would feel breathing on his face while in bed. He told me several months after it started happening, thinking that it would freak me out if he told me. He's not the type to jump to it's a ghost conclusion. After I had my daughter, I was even more scared to be in the house by myself. I even began locking myself in our room every single night. One night, I was waiting for him to come home from work. It was around 3 a.m. I heard the door handle jiggle as if someone were about to come in, but then stopped. I figured my boyfriend had to use the bathroom or something. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I called him asking why he didn't come in yet, and he told me that he wasn't even home. My friend came over to hang out with me and my daughter. I was changing her while my friend was in the other room. I heard someone say, "Hello?" And I thought it was my friend, but she said she heard it too, and that it wasn't her. I would get my friend to come pick me and my daughter up frequently when my boyfriend was at work because I was so afraid. One night, I had an overwhelming feeling of danger and had them come get us. I was taking my daughter's car seat out to their car, and it literally felt like someone yanked it down and out of my hands. I didn't drop it. I don't know how to explain it other than to say just that it was yanked or jerked down. I hated being in this house. I can't even explain the feelings that I felt all the time. I was just so terrified, and I'm so happy to be out of there. We moved away 3 years ago. On moving day, my boyfriend told me there were garbage bags at the top of the stairs that were placed in a way that they weren't going to go anywhere. But as he and his brother were loading up the last bit of stuff out the front door, he saw these bags come tumbling from down the stairs. My bland storytelling does my emotions no justice. I've never been so scared just to be in my own house every night. As soon as the sun would set, the whole vibe would shift. I thought I was crazy. I was getting angry and upset far too often over nothing. I honestly dread the idea of ever going through something like that again. Among the many ghost stories told during lull periods of lengthy military exercises, the one that stood out the most in Singapore is probably that of the Third Door Charlie Company. In short, it was about how a third door was made to allow the spirit of a recruit who had died a gruesome and mysterious death to leave peacefully. There was even a local movie made about the incident called 2359 that you can find on YouTube. I have personally seen this third door, so there's at least some credence to the story. My story, however, happened many years later when the camp was largely unused. My company was planning to use the rifle range near the camp for our annual rifle proficiency test, which lasted several days. I was selected to be part of a very small advance party that would arrive a few days before the main body. The barracks of the camp were essentially longhouses separated by their respective toilets and laundry areas. My platoon mates and I would occupy one of the longhouses during the night, where we would play cards and tell creepy stories to pass time. It was almost midnight, and I needed to relieve myself. I had just stepped out of the barrack when I noticed that the lights of the toilet belonging to the Charlie Company had suddenly come on. The bright white light cast a clear shadow of a man onto the water point of the laundry area. I froze. There was a voice telling me to investigate, while another told me to go and grab my friends. The shadow didn't seem to budge at all during the entire time that I was observing it. Then, I heard my friend calling out for me. This snapped me out of my reverie as I rushed back in and pulled my friends out to show them what I had seen. By then, however, the lights had already gone back off. My friends suggested that it was probably the range warden, which was the only logical explanation. What really puzzled me then was that my friend had called out to me because I had been gone for too long, but yet, in my mind, the whole thing only lasted for a minute or two. The next day, I quizzed the range warden about the incident, and a worried look came over his face as he explained that he was nowhere near the camp the night before. What's more perplexing was that the power to Charlie Company had been cut. During the summer of last year, I was visiting my family at my grandma's house. I met up with my cousins and we decided to take the day to go out, eat, and catch up. After countless conversations regarding how my grandmother was still extremely religious, Muslim, we reflected on how we turned out not to be so religious and laughed. Until we had the brilliant idea of playing with the Ouija board in my grandma's living room, where, mind you, she had a chandelier that played 2 small verses from the Quran every time it was turned on. When we went back to the house, it was already nighttime, but we decided to wait a little longer before we began. Meanwhile, out of curiosity, we asked our grandma about the Quran lights. She said that her uncle had installed them about 6 years ago and that they had stopped working, reciting the verses, not actually lighting up the place. About a month after he bought them, and she laughed it off. Later, when we found that the living room was vacant, it was our perfect chance. We turned off all the lights and settled around the table where we placed the Ouija board and everything. We began the process, following the instructions carefully. After about 15 minutes of nothing, we decided that the Ouija board didn't work, and that we didn't have the true paranormal experience that we wanted. It was our first time playing, or trying to. We closed it up and I got up to go turn the lights back on, and the second I did so, the chandelier started reciting holy verses of the Quran. I froze in place and stared at my cousins, who looked just as shocked as me. I turned the lights off immediately and got out of the room while one of my cousins rushed to take the Ouija board out of the room as well. One of my cousins said that this is a warning from God, that a spirit had entered and that the Quran was pushing it away. I didn't believe him, but we turned the lights on again, and that time the verses didn't play. I thought it might have been a coincidence, a creepy one, but a coincidence nevertheless. My cousin grabbed the Ouija board and stepped back in with it, and she turned on the lights, and again the chandelier recited the verses. This time she looked at me and said that there was no way that it could be a coincidence. We all agreed that we wouldn't mess around with it again, and we threw out the Ouija board the next morning. The chandelier never recited the Quran again, and we never told our grandma about it. I want to start by saying that I'm no stranger to odd dreams. I have experienced sleep paralysis many a time throughout my life. I had a dream shadow stalker for years, and I used to have a haunted bed frame that gave me some of the worst night terrors I've ever had. I have shaman blood on my dad's side, and I myself have been studying various aspects of the occult and paranormal for over a decade. But those stories are for another post. I'm just used to this sort of thing. I wanted to express that. That leads me here. Not sure if anyone's felt this as well, but I have been a ball of anxiety lately. Obviously related to the uncertainty in the world and all, yet I still shouldn't feel it this much. The dreams I've been experiencing have been extremely strange. Like I said, I have vivid, lifelike dreams constantly, but typically they're broken up. I have been having Inception-style dreams for the past 2 months every time I go to sleep. Like I'll dream of actually waking up and going about my day, but then I actually wake up. It's so disorientating. Last night, I had a very weird dream. the strangest of them all. I can't recall what I was doing, but I remember distinctly being in a dark, dusty room. The only part I truly know is that there was some kind of box or container with a lid in front of me. Everything was in first person. It felt so real. I lifted the box, and laying in it were 2 dead gray mice. They were stiff and curled towards each other, like a heart almost. That's all I can remember. I only remembered specifically because my significant other said something about a mouse this morning. I did some investigation and read that this could mean a period of financial instability, but was curious to see if anyone else had any ideas. "25 years ago, we moved homes. It wasn't in the greatest of areas, but it was better than we were previously. I shared a room with one of my 4 sisters. We had a TV in our room, but the remote control was broken, so we never used it. It stayed on Channel 5, the TV Guide channel. After a few months of living there, the TV in our room would randomly turn on every night and switch to Channel 33, which was usually Seventh Heaven or Full House that would be playing. No one in my family ever watched that channel. We didn't think anything paranormal about it. The house didn't feel creepy. Everything was fine aside from the TV turning on. Eventually, the channel would change to a station with just static, and the volume would turn on all the way. It would scare us and wake us up every night, so we unplugged the TV. Ever since the station had changed to static, the vibe of the house felt different. It was heavy, and my sisters and I always felt afraid, but we didn't know why. After a year living there, we would experience weird things. Lights turning off and on, random noises, hearing kids. Our aunt lived downstairs, and she was always keeping her room locked, even when she was home. One day my sister and I went downstairs to grab the vacuum, and we heard jumping on my aunt's bed, and her door was wide open. My aunt was at work, so we poked our heads in to see who was there. We saw no one, but heard kids laughing and the bed moving, once again as if someone were jumping up and down on it. A few days later, we were playing in the living room upstairs and we heard a cough coming from down the hall. We went to check on who it was, because no one was home aside from my sisters and I, and we were all together. We saw a man in black pointing to my sister's room as if he wanted us to go. We were terrified, so of course we didn't. We stayed put until my parents came home. When they arrived, we told them what happened. They went to check out my sister's room, and there were scratches and crayon marks all over the wall and ceiling. We ended up moving out of the house when my aunt was sleeping with her door locked, and in the middle of her sleep, she heard the voices of 3 different men. When she tried to open her eyes, they were held shut. They choked her and laughed. She tried to scream for help, but she couldn't make a sound. She eventually passed out, and when she woke up, she felt as though she had been beaten. Her door was still locked, and everything was still in place. We thought it was sleep paralysis, as there were no signs of anything that happened. But later on that day, and within the next few days, there were bruises all over her body and around her neck. We couldn't explain what had occurred. When I was 16, I started dating this 20-year-old. It was a very bad relationship in which I was cheated on and treated like crap, but that's another story. Anyway, after my 17th birthday, I finally dumped him and got him to leave me alone. A couple months later, I was on Skype with one of my old friends around 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I hear tap, tap, tap on my window. Now, my bed is right next to, kind of underneath my window, and my bedroom is on the other side of the house from my parents. I asked my friend if he had heard anything, and he said no. A few seconds later, tap, 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 and he said yeah, that he had heard that. I agreed, ended the Skype call, and ran to my parents' room. I woke my mom up, and after telling her why I woke her up, she stopped being angry, and we tried to see if anyone was outside the house. No dice. So I slept in my parents' bed with them. At 17. The next day, my dad had apparently seen vague shoe prints outside my window. It happened twice more, and after the third time, my mom called the non-emergency police line and was suggested to put up a motion light and/or a security camera. We put up a motion light that day. I've yet to hear knocking on my window since the light was put up, and it's been 2.5 years. I'm about 95% certain that it's my psycho ex, because he would come to my window between 1 and 3 a.m. when we were together sometimes and knock. Also, one of my friends who had mutual friends with my ex said that my ex was in the area. He lived about 30 miles away from me, the nights when the knocking happened. So for my cheating asshole of an ex, let's not meet again. Since I was 18 or so, I've been having dreams where I know it's a dream, but I cannot wake up. Once, I dreamed that I was sleeping in my bed at my parents' house, and suddenly I woke up in the dream, and everything was normal. TV on, door slightly open, but there was a weird feeling in the room, which I ignored. I tried to get back to sleep, but my conscience told me to turn my head to the door, which I did. It was slightly open again, but this time it was opening a little more every second that passed, and a dark presence was on the other side of the room. At this point, I freaked out, jumped out of my bed, and tried to get out of the room, but something was holding me back, and the path from my bed to the door seemed eternal. Suddenly, everything stopped, and I woke up again in the same position I dreamed of first, TV on, door slightly open. I was still dreaming, and the same thing happened again. Door slowly opening, and me trying to run away from the room through a never-ending path from my bed to the door, with a weird feeling of someone watching me all along. This was a cycle that happened a number of times, that I can't remember, but it was more than 4. I knew I was dreaming, but could not wake up. I was really scared. I tried to wake me up by yelling or hitting me in the dream. Nothing worked. I remember that in real life I was not in my parents' house, and therefore I was not in that bed. At that moment, when I remembered that, I woke up. I dreamed something like that a couple of weeks ago where I couldn't wake up, even though I knew I was dreaming. I have no idea why this happens. In high school, my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before, and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night, there was no one else home except the 7 of us, and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed historically accurate for our town. Things we never knew or never cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s, and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm in the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out, because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical, and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. It went to yes, and then spelled out knock. Then the planchette stopped moving. We all just stared at it silently, and then there was a rap, rap, rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside, and there was absolutely no one there. We never touched that effing board again. When I was about 5 years old, I used to have these scary, recurring dreams that always had the same old woman in them. The old woman had gray, curly, short hair, and she was always wearing a creepy black dress with lace on the hems. In the dreams, she would always be trying to scare me. It seemed as though she took pleasure in scaring me. A prominent one that I remember is her sitting on top of me whilst I slept, with a basket of flowers. She would just stare right at me. So only about 3 or 4 years ago, when I was about 16 or 17, that same exact woman appeared in my dream. Same scary vibe and everything. What is super creepy about this occurrence is that I hadn't thought about this woman or talked about her for so many years. It was totally random for that to happen to me. Plus, this recent dream was just as vivid as the others. Almost as though she was visiting me again through her own free will. Another thing that might not have anything to do with the dream is that when I was a child I had a black dress just like hers that would hang in my closet, and I didn't know where it came from. It always creeped me out because it looked like the scary old woman's dress. I can't remember where I got it, but I might have worn it to my grandmother's funeral, who died when I was 2 or 3. I'm in the Navy and I currently work on a base which encompasses an island called San Clemente Island. The island itself is mostly deserted and is untouched. But on the north side of the island is a town, for lack of better words, where the Navy and contractors live. One night I was headed down to relieve a coworker from watch. As I'm driving down the road, which is mostly pitch black, I see a figure in the street in my headlights. Naturally, I slam the brakes. I begin cussing up a storm because some idiot is walking in the middle of the road at night. Shortly after, however, I notice that it isn't a person, but more of a solid shadow. You could make out no features on it, but it had mass and was human-shaped. It was in the middle of the road and sort of stomping, almost like a weird dance. Then suddenly, it was just gone. It didn't fade away, didn't do anything dramatic, just disappeared. I freaked out and told a lot of my coworkers who didn't believe me. We never saw it again. I have heard some stories of people on the island having doors in their work areas open and stuff moving around on its own, but no stories anything similar to mine. I don't know much about the history of the island itself, but I do know at some point it was owned by Native Americans, and quite often remains of them are found or unearthed. I had a dream last night that I was being shown a series of gorillas in cages. In the dream, my brother told me that they had developed new technology to allow me to feel the touch of their hands through the cages, sort of like the suits in Ready Player One. Weird dream logic. Anyway, I'm being dragged through the enclosure, and one of the gorillas strokes my head, neck, and back. The thing is, I could actually feel this sensation in my body. I have never, ever felt anything palpably in a dream. My reaction to the sensation was a deep-set revulsion. The creepy thing is that it felt like there was a creature surveying my sleeping body, stroking it like a piece of meat to play with, while imbuing my dreams with an excuse as to why it was happening. Stranger still was that when I opened my eyes after the dream, I could feel this huge hand cupped over my mouth. I felt completely powerless to the creature. It was as though it had little tangible intelligence, but I could feel its feral nature enjoying the moment. It felt like something had lain down behind me in bed. Every time I opened my eyes, I could feel its massive hand over my mouth. Chalk it up to the mind playing tricks, or whatever. It was creepy and intimidating.